right, welcome. In this clinical briefing, we're going to break down the essential updates for 2026 on insulin pumps and maybe more importantly, the new coverage pathways for your patients with type 2 diabetes. The whole landscape has really shifted, and this explainer is designed to get you and your practice ready for what's next.
So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the major changes to the pump landscape. Then we'll compare the automated insulin delivery or AID systems side by side. After that, we're going to untangle that pharmacy versus durable medical equipment coverage maze. We'll also dig into some specific Medicare and Medicaid rules, uncover a really critical C-peptide loophole, and then wrap it all up with some key takeaways for your practice. Okay, first up, let's just get the lay of the land. The big story for 2026 really boils down to two things: major shifts in what your patients will pay and how they can get these devices. And that, of course, is going to directly impact your prescribing decisions. The single biggest headline for your Medicare patients is this number right here. Thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, we now have a hard annual cap of $2,100 on out-of-pocket drug costs under Part D. I mean, this is an absolute game changer for affordability, especially when we talk about pumps covered under the pharmacy benefit. But it's not just that cost cap. There are other big forces at play here. Medicare's first-ever negotiated drug prices are now in effect, which might actually slow down how fast your patients even hit that new out-of-pocket limit. And in states like Arkansas, we're seeing continuous glucose monitor coverage get streamlined with the pharmacy benefit, which makes it so much easier to bundle with a pump. And maybe most critically, multiple AID systems now have official FDA indications for type 2 diabetes.
So, with these expanded indications, what are the actual hardware options on the table? You know, it's more important than ever to be able to match the right piece of tech to the right patient profile.
First up is the Omnipod 5. You know, its biggest draw has always been that tubeless patch-like design. But a recent algorithm update is pretty significant. It allows for a lower target glucose of 100, which can help with tighter control, and it maintains that broad CGM compatibility with both Dexcom and Libre.
Next, we've got the Medtronic MiniMed 780G. Now, this is a tubed pump, and its real standout feature is the meal detection tech. So if the system senses a glucose rise because a patient missed or, underestimated a meal bolus, it automatically hits them with stronger correction boluses every 5 minutes. This can be a huge safety net, especially for those patients who really struggle with consistent carb counting.
And then you've got Tandem, which is all about giving you options in hardware. You've got the T-Slim X2 with its familiar touchscreen, and then the much smaller screenless Mobi pump that's controlled completely from a smartphone. The important thing is, they both run on the Control-IQ Plus algorithm, and that's been tweaked specifically to handle the wider weight and daily insulin dose ranges that are pretty common in the T2D population. Okay, so when you lay them all out side by side like this, the trade-offs become really clear. You're weighing Omnipod's tubeless design against the larger 300-unit reservoirs in the Medtronic and the Tandem T-Slim. This kind of direct comparison really helps you start tailoring your recommendation based on core patient needs, like their daily insulin dose, their comfort level with tubing, and what kind of hardware they prefer.
Right, so let's translate those specs into actual clinical decisions. For your patients with higher insulin needs, those 300-unit reservoirs on the tubed pumps, well, that just means fewer site changes, which is a big quality-of-life win. For patients who find carb counting to be a huge barrier, Medtronic's meal detection is a really powerful tool. And of course, for anyone prioritizing discretion, the Omnipod 5 patch or that tiny Tandem Mobi are the obvious winners. All right, now we're going to dive into what is, let's be honest, often the most confusing part of this whole process, the two different billing channels. Whether a pump gets covered through the pharmacy benefit or as durable medical equipment, DME pretty much determines everything else, from the paperwork to the patient's final cost. The divide is actually pretty simple once you see it laid out. Disposable patch pumps, like the Omnipod 5, are now almost always a pharmacy benefit. That means you can just e-prescribe them straight to a retail pharmacy. It's fast. On the other hand, the traditional tubed pumps from Tandem and Medtronic, they're still a DME benefit. That means going through a specialized supplier and dealing with a much slower process with a lot more paperwork.
Okay, so let's take that pharmacy versus DME framework and apply it to the two biggest payers your T2D patients are likely to have. We're going to zoom in on some Arkansas-specific policies for 2026 just to see how this all plays out in a real-world setting.
For Arkansas Medicaid, the big change is how they've split things up. All the patch pumps like the Omnipod 5 and the basal-only GO now fall under the pharmacy benefit, and that just radically simplifies the whole fulfillment process. The tubed pumps, they stay on the DME side, and that means you still need a prior auth through the Magellan portal. But the core clinical criteria, pretty much the same for both.
Now, under Medicare, the split is just as clear-cut. Tubed pumps are a Part B DME benefit. That means your patient is on the hook for a 20% coinsurance after their deductible. But the Omnipod 5, because it's a Part D pharmacy benefit, falls under that new $2,100 annual out-of-pocket cap we talked about. And for both pathways, they get the $35 monthly cap on insulin.
And this creates a really important financial advantage you need to know about for your dual-eligible patients. When they get a tube pump under Medicare Part B, Arkansas Medicaid will almost always pick up that 20% coinsurance. What does that mean? It often means their out-of-pocket costs for the actual pump hardware can be zero.
All right, now for what might be the most actionable piece of intelligence in this entire briefing, how that pharmacy versus DME split directly impacts the C-peptide requirement and how it creates a pretty powerful loophole to get around this common barrier.
This has been a huge hurdle for years, right? Trying to get T2D patients on pumps. But for 2026, the answer to this question isn't a simple yes or no anymore. It now depends entirely on which pump you choose, and because of that, which billing channel you're using.
And here it is. This is the loophole, plain and simple. Because the Omnipod 5 gets billed through the pharmacy channel under both Medicare Part D and Arkansas Medicaid, it completely bypasses those restrictive C-peptide rules that have always governed DME. For their traditional tubed pumps that are billed as DME, yep, you still need that C-peptide test to prove beta cell deficiency.
So this gives you two very clear documentation pathways. Path A, well, that's the path of least resistance. For a T2D patient who you suspect has a high C-peptide, just prescribing the Omnipod 5 is the absolute simplest way to get them on pump therapy. Now, if a tubed pump is truly clinically necessary, then you've got to take Path B and just heavily document the medical necessity for safety. Think hypoglycemia, unawareness, severe glycemic excursions to argue for a waiver.
Okay, we have covered a ton of ground. Let's boil it all down and quickly summarize the most important practice-changing points from this briefing that you can start using right away.
Here are your 4 big high-yield takeaways. Number 1, use that pharmacy shortcut for the Omnipod 5. Number 2, always remember to check Medicare Advantage plans because most of them have also moved these devices to the pharmacy benefit. 3, for any Medicaid PAs, make sure your chart notes explicitly state the patient is on a basal bolus regimen. And finally, number 4, don't forget that your dual-eligible patients can often get a DME pump for zero out-of-pocket costs.
This one change, just the ability to simply e-prescribe an advanced aid system like you would any other standard medication, is an incredibly powerful tool to speed up access for your patients with type 2 diabetes. And it really leaves us with a final question. Now that access is simpler and costs are so much lower, which of your patients could benefit the most from this new paradigm?